Hey y'all, thank you for tuning in to our third episode of our CNS Alumni video series, where we interview prominent alumni that have gone down different paths and learn a lot about their path and see how they rose to success. My name is Sakit,
Richard.
and we're your hosts from the Natural Sciences Council. Our third guest that we have here today is Mr. Mike Newton. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mike Newton. I went to undergrad in Texas, 85 graduate, got a master's degree in 88, and then went to law school in 91. And I worked in California for a few years when I got out. Then I moved back to Texas, and now I'm back in California.
Wow, that's really quite a long time at the 40 acres, almost, 8 years, just about. Thank you so much for coming out here. We really appreciate it. We know your time is valuable, so we do appreciate you coming out. And without any further ado, do you mind if we jump into the first question?
Let's go.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about your time as an undergrad here at UT? Like, what was your major? What were you involved in, et cetera?
Yeah. So I was a physics major with kind of a heavy emphasis on math. I never lived in Texas before. I went to college there. My dad was in the Navy for a number of years. I lived in Massachusetts, Virginia, California. I was born in Idaho, of all places, because my dad was a nuclear power submariner. And he took a second career job in Texas for an engineering company called Brown and Root. And he didn't want to pay for me to go to MIT or any place like that. So he said, public school. He said, Texas has a good physics department. So I ended up going there, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I really, for the first time in my life, I just let my mind go crazy. So I was totally into physics. I was totally into philosophy. I took 20 hours every semester. I really loved school. And it's the first time I really, read a lot. The professors were so accessible at the time, so it was really nice. And another passion outside of kind of school things was I played a ton of intramural sports. So I played football, I played basketball, I played tennis, I did track, whatever the Frisbee games called, did all of that. So those are kind of my passions in all of my time at UT. So like I said earlier, I graduated undergrad in 85. Then was trying to decide what should I do. And I thought, should I go to law school? Should I go to medical school? And I decided I really wanted to be a theoretical physicist. So I went to graduate school and started there in 85 and went through 88.
Thank you so much for sharing your path at UT Austin. Sounds like you really, really enjoyed and took advantage of your time here. I mean,
Definitely.
Just based off the amount of hours you took and academics you went through, it just sounds like a really crazy journey, and it sounds like you really had a good time here. So now I want to progress a little bit. So we know after graduation you kind of pursued a master's in physics, but then you kind of switched gears a bit and then decided to pursue law. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of what led you to that path and how you progressed your career to where you are today?
Yep. So I thought I was going to be the next, Albert Einstein. I was going to win a Nobel Prize by the time I was 26. So I got in the theoretical physics department there in graduate school. And, John Wheeler was there. Weinberg was there, still a lot younger at the time. Fischler was there. I mean, Joel Pochinski, a really sound group of theoreticians. And so I started doing my work, and I actually wanted Steven Weinberg as my thesis advisor. So I walked in his office one day and said, I really want to study, fundamentals of quantum mechanics, hidden variable theories, Bell's inequality, quantum entanglement. And he looked at me and said, if you don't want to do string theory, then I'm not your advisor. He said, the only money that's out there is for string theory. And I just did not want to do string theory. And that was the really new hot thing at the time. And so, I thought about it. And so I ultimately got Austin Gleason, who was, the head of the CNS group for a long time, the department. He was my advisor. And little by little, I started thinking, I really don't want to do what I'm doing my research in. And so I had a younger brother who was in law school, and, I knew nothing about law, just clueless. But I was, working and living off my graduate stipend or whatever it was, a small amount of money. I lived up in Riverside when Riverside was not a very nice area. And my younger brother's first summer was making a lot of money. And I thought, you know nothing and you're making all this money, So I thought, well, maybe I will try law. And so on a whim, I took the LSAT, and after 3 years in graduate school, I got a master's and got out and pursued law. So that's kind of how I ended up, going down the legal path.
You know, that's definitely, not traditional. I don't think that there's a lot of people that jump from theoretical physics to law, because that is quite a switch in careers. But really glad that you were able to, figure out what worked for you and find what you're passionate about and, start pursuing that. That being said, I can't imagine that those 8 years were, like all rainbows and butterflies. So did you have any major bumps in the roads or hardships? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Well, I'd say one of the hardships was when you go to law school and you come from theoretical physics, you're a little arrogant. You think you're smarter than everybody. You find out very quickly that there's a lot of talented people in a lot of different fields. I was very good at math, and physics, obviously, chemistry. I was not a great writer. And so for me back then, you had to take test writing in a blue book. There was no computer to type it on. And to have to sit there and fill up a blue book for a 3-hour test, I mean, my hand would cramp. It was the worst feeling ever. And my handwriting is still today comically bad. So that was a real bump in the road. And I'll give you one other story. So I was doing a talk on quantum gravity, and in the room were John Wheeler, Steven Weinberg, and a guy named Bryce DeWitt. And I don't know if you've ever had this happen. You get at a board, you're starting to do something, and suddenly you're so into it, you start having tunnel vision. And I just couldn't think at the board at all. And thankfully, the people in the audience started getting in a debate amongst themselves about this gravitational, this theory, gravitational theory. And so thankfully, I had time to back away from the board, but I kind of realized then, am I really cut out to do this? So there was, a kind of a bump in the road. The same thing in law school. I thought, I don't want to rely on my patent background and be a patent litigator. So I'm going to be a trial lawyer and I'm going to do commercial litigation. And so I kind of rebelled against that. But when you go out and try to get a job, I was much better pursued by the patent litigation law firms. They said, hey, you've got this great technical degree. If you want to do litigation, come do patent litigation. But it wasn't a sexy area at the time. It's since become a very popular area, and maybe it's on the downhill now. But during my career, it's been a very busy, a lot of really high-end cases. So it was a very good decision in the long run. But I was kind of pushed there just, for a job reason, if you will.
Yeah, thank you so much for being open and sharing some of the struggles you experienced. And it's cool to hear how you progressed to where you are today in law. And so I guess that moves on to the next question. So currently you're a partner at your law firm. So can you maybe talk a little bit about your role and what it entails?
Yeah, so, as a partner, you're kind of head of whatever case you bring in. You also need to generate the work. And that's kind of that's the difference between what we call associates, or the younger people, like between 0 and 10 years. And then you come up and you make, kind of income or lower level partner, and then eventually to senior partner. And so as a partner, you're responsible for the day-to-day, but you don't necessarily do all the work. You don't answer the discovery responses. You don't necessarily take all the depositions. You're kind of putting the theory together. If the case goes to trial, you'll be doing a lot of that work. If you're meeting with experts and taking their depositions, or executives like Michael Dell, you might be defending Michael's deposition. So that's kind of what you do as a partner. And then, with economics being what they are, things have become a lot more strict as far as budgets. So, you just don't come in and say, oh, we're just going to charge you X dollars per hour. The business folks now say, hey, we want to know what this is going to cost, much like an engineering project. They want you to have a budget. They want you to stick with it. So I spend a lot of time now, and I think a lot of partners do, just managing to a budget and, putting a pitch together at the beginning of a case saying, we're going to get this case done for X amount. This phase is going to cost Y and this phase Z, and then just trying to work towards those numbers and still, win the case. So that's a lot of what I do. And then there's administrative responsibilities. I'm head of, or a co-head of, our intellectual property area, which is about 130 people. And so there's a lot that goes into managing people, making sure people are getting trained properly, making sure we take care of, and are mindful of diversity issues and things like that. So there's a lot of work that goes on just managing the firm and managing the people and making it a good place to work, the place I work at is a law firm, and it's rare for a law firm to be some of the best places to work, but our firm is on one of those things, and we've been it for 20 years. So it's a cultural thing, and we spend a lot of time trying to make sure we are a good place to work and that we value, every person in our firm, from the, the people at the lowest levels to the highest levels.
That's actually really great because I know when I was reading a little bit about law firms, I saw that, they weren't necessarily always the best work environment. So I'm glad that your company and your firm specifically has worked really hard on that. But I did actually want to maybe elaborate on one point you brought up. You said that partners were typically people that were more senior and had more experience in the field. So that being said, can you maybe talk a little bit about your progression from like right out of law school to where you are today?
Yep. So as I mentioned earlier, when I first got out, I moved to Southern California, actually Los Angeles. And I started with, at that time, what was called a patent boutique. So it was maybe 70 lawyers and mostly did patent related work, either patent litigation or helping people get patents. And, at that time, you talk about things that you didn't do well. I was a horrible writer. So I remember getting with the trial lawyer and I wrote this really detailed technical thing, and he looked at it, basically wanted to rip it up, but he red inked it all over. He just said, "This is way too complicated. What are you doing?" The audience is a judge and a jury, and so you have to write in a way that is understandable and simple and clear. So as a young person, a lot of what you do is in your career is, writing, answering discovery, kind of learning a lot of research to learn just what's the area of law, because law is a very huge area, and you may be a constitutional lawyer, you may be labor and employment lawyers. So they're just, whatever your field is, you've got to learn it. And it takes, 2 or 3 years to kind of learn, I hate to call it a game, but the game. And then you progress further and further and you get more responsibility on your feet. And so that's kind of what young lawyers do. And once they know the game, then eventually, their friends start being people who give out work. Some people work for a firm, some people may work for a company like, let's say, Dell. And the people in-house at Dell will decide who are they going to hire outside. And as your friends move up at that level, you're finally at a level where they can give you work. You have enough experience. And then at that point, you start being considered for being a partner. But even at 10 years experience, there's still a lot to learn, a lot of experience. The very most polished lawyers you see in court often are, more like 15 years out and maybe even more. And certainly when you watch, if you have an election fight, the people that are going to defend the president, they're going to be people with 30 or 40 years experience, just because they've been there, done that. They've been before the Supreme Court, they've been before all the courts of appeals. They speak regularly, they're extremely well educated. So I hope I answered your question.
No, you definitely did. Definitely illuminated like what it is or to go from like where you started to where you are today. And especially that point at the end, very topical, especially around this time where, that's a very hot topic issue. But that being said, you did bring up Dell a few times. And we got a chance to look through some of the cases you've worked on, ranging from biotech to consumer brands and more. And we found it incredibly interesting, the incredible variety. So that kind of being said, we were wondering what led you to work on these types of cases? And do you think your CNS background has influenced what you work on?
Oh, 100%. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're going to get a job, University of Texas Law School is a pretty competitive place. And if you want to work for what they call the, big law, which is like maybe the top 100 firms with lots of lawyers, it's very competitive. When I was going through to get one of the top jobs, you kind of had to graduate the top 25% out of your law school to get these good jobs. So it was competitive. And so just right from the outset, having that one extra skill set or arrow in my quiver, this technical background, was very helpful. And then, as a young lawyer talking about things that you do, you're trying to understand a case. So you're reading through a patent, something you've never heard of before, you've never seen, but just knowing that you can figure something out really helps you. And a lot of times the words that you're reading in the patents are related to something you studied in school. So whether it's electrical, I don't know if you guys, the Wi-Fi standard, there's a ton of patent litigation around, who created all the different things that make your Wi-Fi work, who created the things that make your 3G, 4G, now 5G phones and the technology there work. Internet of Things is now a hot thing. I just got done with a case for Dell, or about to get done, dealing with touch screens. How does a touch screen work? And capacitive touch. So all these things that I learned, physics ideas about capacitance or electricity or about modulation are really useful day to day in what I do in my work. And then just, I think the confidence that you can figure out anything scientifically. If you dug through a really hard paper and you first read it, and you didn't even understand the first word, and back in the day, you couldn't go to Google or Wiki. You'd have to go to the library and you grab one book and then read another and read another. Pretty soon, you could understand a 10-page paper that at first you didn't understand a word. But I think going through that allows you, when you have to take on a new technology in every case, to pick it up and know you're going to figure it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, thank you for sharing how, your background in education, has been pretty relevant in what you do today. So I feel like that's really cool that, even something that, seems so different, physics and law still has application in where you work today. So,
well, let me add one thing to that too. So a lot of the experts we use, they're professors at universities like University of Texas or Stanford, Harvard, MIT, wherever. And in fact, what's funny is I can now get some professors' time that when I was a graduate student, they wouldn't have given me the time of day. And now that I'm a lawyer and I need them as a consultant or as an expert, I spend a lot of time with these folks and talking to them and kind of seeing what they think. And having the credibility of doing science myself at a reasonable level, gains credibility with them. And so you can have a meaningful conversation about what is the patent really about, or is the patent valid? Is it invalid? Is it infringed? Which means, is it used or not? So the technology definitely comes in, and the technical education is important in that context as well.
Yeah, once again, thank you for sharing that. It's just really awesome to see that connection. So you mentioned some of those cases that you worked on. So I wanted to kind of ask, were there any specific cases or case that, made a significant impact on you or your career?
Yeah, there's a number. So very early in my career, I went to California, and at that time, the clientele for my California firm was primarily Asia Pacific companies and primarily Japanese company making memory. So at the time, DRAM was a really big business, and I think we were on 4K was the cutting, or was it 4K? No, 4 meg was the big memory, and then it went to 16 meg. And every time you went to a new generation, there's all kinds of technical challenges to figure out. So when I moved back to Texas after 3 years in California, I started doing work for Texas Instruments. And Texas Instruments was really a fundamental company for figuring out a lot of things with memory and computers and semiconductor processing. And so they at one time used to be in the Taiwanese. And at some point, their business was really struggling. And so they decided, we were really the founders of this, and we have way more patents than those companies. We actually want people to pay us money for our patent portfolio. And inevitably, people don't just want to pay you, you have to litigate. So I got on some very big cases for Texas Instruments early on in my career, where we were the plaintiff. And we were one of the first companies to sue in the Eastern District of Texas and realized you could get to trial very quickly there. And then that became a real hotbed for patent litigation. So that was important to my career because we were one of the first companies to take advantage of that forum. And then everybody else imitated that for a long time. And then just to get to try cases. I mean, I get to try, there were cases that were worth $1 billion when all was said and done. And so that a lot of smart people on all sides. One of the lawyers on the other side, we've sued Samsung. And we won. And then a year later, that person was put on the bench in Eastern District of Texas. His name was John Ward, and he was on the bench for 25 more years and a real pioneer for patent case law in the Eastern District of Texas. So the Texas Instruments stuff was important. Then on the defensive side, I became very close with Nokia when they were the biggest cell phone maker in the world. I also started working with Dell and DirecTV, did a lot of work for those 3 companies on the defensive side. And so I learned a lot there. And it was interesting to see, Nokia had a lot of the ideas you see in Apple phones before Apple did, but they loved that model, that brick model, really small thing you could hold in your hand. And so they weren't going to go, they thought, oh, no one's going to want to pay $1,000 for a, a thing with a big screen and that you carry around. So they, you see a business decision that didn't work out, but they certainly had a very strong patent portfolio. And eventually they got out of the cell phone business, and now they make a fair amount of money off licensing their patents. So I was in litigation with Apple and Samsung and others, and Nokia's done very well with their patent portfolio. And then, finally, I've done work for many years for Dell. Dell's usually on the defensive side. They get sued a lot and everything, as you can imagine. There's just so much technology in a computer that it just leads to a ton of litigation.
I think that's really interesting, the way that you've been able to work on such a variety of cases, and at the same time be able to work with some of these really big companies that all of us just hear about but never actually get to see firsthand. So I think that's really cool.
And let me tell you one story. So I lived in Dobie, and Michael Dell lived in Dobie as well. And I remember hearing the story. There's this kid that's starting a computer business, and my brother knew him better than I did, but eventually he dropped out, and look what he's doing today. So kind of a little interesting side note.
Wow, that's very unexpected. That's not where I really thought you were going to go with that, but that's really crazy just to think about, the people that we go to school with. And yeah, wow, you're right. Michael Dell, where he's at now, and it's very, very, very impressive. That being said, though, do you have any cases that you think are really relevant, especially right now, that anyone might actually know about, that you can talk about?
So there's a case for Regeneron that we just pitched. We don't know that we'll get it, but they're the people that created the drug that President Trump took when he got COVID. And so it's a therapeutic that helps you get over things. And so they've got a lawsuit. Someone's actually sued them in that. And we're going to try to create a theory that says you can't sue them because it's COVID related. So it's exempted out. And so any infringement of any patents related to generating a cure or a therapeutic, you're just forgiven for that type of infringement. But we'll see where that case goes. So that's kind of cutting edge and pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting, and especially because it has to do with the pandemic, very topical. So thank you for sharing that. I guess we kind of have gone through the major bulk of the interview. We're kind of winding down. That being said, one thing we kind of want to do is, take a look back and look at your path from where it started to where it is now. And what we were wondering was, if you look back on your path, would you do anything different, or and if you would change anything, what would you change?
So I think the right answer has to be you wouldn't change anything. And I don't think I would, because, it's just been such an interesting path and fun life. But if I do think about things that could be done differently, I'd give you this. So I was so, I don't want to say arrogant, but so hung up on being a theoretician. And I never really thought about the practical side of physics. And so there's a side of me that wishes, one, I spent a little more time in the business school, kind of understanding, how do people make real things and how do you fund it? And then I wish I had thought about tackling a problem that says, what's a problem in the world I'd like to do better? So let's say you care about global warming and you say, how's it really going to get solved? Well, it's really going to get solved when someone creates an alternative to what we have with fossil fuels in our cars. And tackle a problem that you care about, whether it's diabetes or some cancer thing. I wish I had taken a practical problem, or if I was going to redo it, I would take a practical problem, take my science and apply it to that, and then also understand what are the business ramifications and ways you could do very well. So if you see people that did extremely well from a financial standpoint, they often started as a scientist, they start a company, it's fun, they learn everything in the world, they're living on a shoestring budget, but they tackle a cool problem, and eventually they solve the problem, and then everything it's amazing what happens when you solve a cool problem from a business perspective, and all the money that comes in, and so suddenly you're off to the next cool thing. And so it happens a lot in Silicon Valley. I think it's happening in Texas now with some of the incubator projects. It looks like there's a lot of good things going on in that area, and it should happen in Texas as much as any place, but it's a pretty wild ride if you go down that path. So if I were to do things differently, I might be a little more practical in what I was doing rather than, pure theory. So that would be my advice to some, thinking about, do they want to be a theoretician, experimentalist? And do you want to still tackle something really cool?
Okay, yeah. It's nice to see that you would want to, if you had to do it all over again, just really tackle an issue that you cared about. And I guess I wanted to turn back to the theoretical physics days at the University of Texas at Austin. And leading up to our final question is, do you have any last parting advice for any current UT Austin students?
Yeah, I just say be true to yourself. You're going to go through a lot of phases in life. Even the time I lived in Austin, I lived like, it seems like a lot of different lives, from the total physics guy to the jock guy playing sports to the law student. Just a lot of different things in life. And so enjoy each phase as it comes to you, and be true to yourself, and put in effort. But I wouldn't worry about the small things on any of it. It kind of works itself out. My grandfather passed a few years ago after 96 years of life, and he said, I would have never known early in my life that everything was going to come together with the way it did. But he said, when I look back, I can see all these things that happened coming together for what made him what he was. And so just kind of trust the process in that sense, and work hard, but don't be afraid of where it takes you.
That's really amazing advice. Thank you so much for sharing that, especially the part about your grandfather. I'm sorry about your loss. But I think that's some really great and, advice that applies to a lot of students. And a lot of students can hopefully draw from, especially in the College of Natural Sciences and just students at UT as a whole. That being said, that was all the questions that we had for you today. We really, really, really appreciate you taking the time to come out and speak with us. And we're really, really looking forward to getting this episode out. Richard, do you have anything else?
No, my pleasure. It's fun.
All right, then again, just want to say thank you so much to the audience. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and be sure to stay on the lookout for the next one. And as always, hook 'em.
Hook 'em.